I think we will go ahead and get started. I will just mention to everybody that I invited Dr. Jack here because I really believe in his techniques. He is somebody who probably needs no introduction, but you know, he's been doing this for decades. He's coached some of the most world-class athletes. He's been on numerous talk shows. He's written columns. He's written books. He's well respected in the financial industry for coaching advisors, and his ultimate stress mastery techniques seemed to be very timely for the stress everybody's under right now. So when I said, hey, why don't you come and talk to our employees and share stress management techniques, it just, and he was willing to do so. It's a real treat to have him. And he didn't even charge us his typical 10 grand for a speaking engagement. So anyway, we really appreciate that, Jack, very much. Thank you for coming. And so I'll turn it over to you, and you can go for as long as you see benefit. And then we'd love to have some time to ask you some questions if you're willing to stay on, and then we'll finish with our agenda after you've finished with your portion.
Perfect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you very much for participating and allowing me to share some of my experience with you and my learning with you. As Robert explained, I've been a professional psychologist for more than 40 years now, much of it in industry and a big bunch of it with the elite athletes as a professional sports psychologist, working with Olympic gold medal winners and people like that. So everything that I teach you today are things that I've taught to all of these people. These are all the same skills. In fact, I wrote a book, The Financial Advisor's Ultimate Stress Mastery Guide, but you don't have to be a financial advisor to learn the techniques that are in there. They apply to everybody. I just wrote it for advisors because that's a niche group that I do a lot of speaking for. And Robert very generously said that if any of you are interested in that book to follow up with what I'm saying, he will provide it for you. So what do you want them to do? Just let you know if they want the book, and then I'll send it to you and you send it to them? Or how do you want to do that, Robert?
Yeah. So when Jack is finished, if you guys want to learn more about what he's teaching you, I will buy you a copy of his book. So I'll just post a message when we're done in the general channel in Slack. And if you want a copy, just thumbs it up, and then we'll have one shipped to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll send you the PDF version, which you can read online. So very easy. Well, you know, I asked Robert, what are some of the subjects, what are some of the concerns that he believes that many of you are having right now? And he was really wrapped up with the word stress. So I entitled this program, All Stressed Up and Nowhere to Go. That's the name of this program. What are you going to do? So I asked Robert, give me a couple of examples of typical issues that perhaps your team worries about on a regular basis. So one of them that he mentioned was, the news is depressing right now. How can I stay positive and make sure it doesn't affect my life negatively? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the news is not depressing, and the news is not anxiety provoking, and the news is not catastrophizing, and the news is not making you happy. The news doesn't do anything. Just like events that happen in your life don't do anything. Situations that happen in your life don't do anything in terms of your emotions. What does something for your emotions is the conversation you have in your head when you recognize that that situation is happening. Now, I'm telling you this because there's some good news here, ladies and gentlemen. The good news is you can learn how to control the conversations in your head. It's just a matter of changing habits that we've all developed since we were kids. Some of those habits came from our parents. For example, if our parents taught us when we were growing up, you know, don't make waves, fly under the radar, you know, if you're seen, you could get in trouble, then that's a habit we learned that's kind of unfortunate. If our parents taught us, don't confront anybody, don't stand out in the crowd, so even if you get offended, you know, be quiet about it, then that's an unfortunate habit we developed when we were growing up that can impact us later. If our parents taught us, or we observed one of our parents being a perfectionist, and we're taught that if you're not perfect, then you failed, then that's an unfortunate habit that we've grown up with. So there are tons of these habits that we grow up with that we don't know consciously we're growing up with them. I call them iceberg core value habits, because most of this is unconscious. It's under the surface like an iceberg. Only a little of it is we made aware of in our conscious awareness. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is how to recognize this and what to do about it. So The news isn't depressing. The pandemic is not depressing. The politics that go with it are not depressing or anxiety producing. But the conversation you have in your head, which is based on years and years of repetition of certain habits, is what causes your emotions, whether they're happy or sad or positive or negative. So the first subject I want to talk to you about is how stress can kick the health out of you. Okay? The good news is you can control it. So that's what we're going to talk about. Let me first tell you that if you're not careful about this and you don't take charge of it, how it can really kick the health out of you. You know, evidence over the years has been growing stronger and stronger that your state of mind can affect your physical health. In fact, Robert Sapolsky, in his groundbreaking book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, it's all about how animals are better off than we are because they don't think like we do. Why zebras don't get ulcers, he concludes that a large body of evidence suggests that stress-related disease emerges predominantly out of the fact that we so often activate a physiological system that has evolved for responding to acute physical emergencies. It's called the fight or flight system. But we turn it on for months on end, worrying about things like mortgages, relationships, the pandemic, how do I deal with my difficult teenager, impatient things, I'm not getting answers fast enough. These are the things that turn on that same system every day with us. Now, why is that a problem? The problem is that the way this was built into us when we, lived in caves and we had to deal with danger every day, like saber-toothed tigers, for example, or we had to go out and hunt our food down, and there was always danger involved. So we were meant to be alert to this danger all the time and turn on the fight or flight or freeze mechanism so we could either save ourselves or capture the prey or whatever we're looking for. The problem is, in the 21st century, the default position in our brains psychologically is when we worry about something, it turns on the same system because the brain doesn't know, maybe this could be a danger. Maybe I need to save the person. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem because every time the fight, flight, or freeze system is employed, all other systems in our body shut down because all the energy has to go there. So what are some of these systems that shut down? The immune system shuts down. We don't need power to the immune system when we're having to do the fight or flight. And if our immune system is shutting down 30, 40 times a day, every time you get aggravated, every time you worry, every time you get impatient, every time you can't get what you want when you want it, every time you have to deal with a child that you're stuck at home with now that you wouldn't have to deal with so many hours, every time you're dealing with your partner who is interrupting you when you're trying to do business or asking foolish questions or what have you, if that's turning on that fight or flight nervous system every time, you are turning off your immune system each time, which makes you much more prone to disease and illness. In fact, it makes you much more prone, if you're doing this, to picking up this virus than you would be if you were calm about all of this. Negative emotions like fear, anxiety, and stress, which come from your thoughts, wire the brain 1,000 times faster than positive emotions like happiness and looking forward to something and optimism. It's all done as a survival mechanism. It has to happen fast so we can survive. Now, research shows that 60,000 thoughts a day occur in our mind, and the vast majority of them, somewhere in the 85% range, are negative thoughts, self-doubt, negativity, fear of failure. What if this happens? I hope this doesn't happen. I shouldn't have done this. How could I have been so stupid? These are the kinds of thoughts that go through our mind most of the day, and each time, ladies and gentlemen, it turns on the fight, flight, or freeze nervous system. It's a problem. Electrical and chemical changes immediately take place in our body. Now, you may say, well, how can that really affect all of us that way? Just a thought can affect us? How can a thought affect our bodies? Well, the research is clear now. For example, we could talk about placebos. How many of you, just raise your hand if you've ever heard of placebos? Sure, almost everyone has heard of placebos, right? Placebos are when they're trying to come up with a new drug. They give half the people in the sample the real drug, They give the other half randomly. Nobody knows who's getting the real one. The other half get a sugar pill. That's called a placebo. The pill does absolutely nothing for you. Here's the interesting finding. So many times, 30, 40% of the people with placebos are cured from whatever the problem was that the drug was aiming at curing. How did that happen? I'll give you another example. After World War II, American Army men with knee problems, they had torn meniscus, torn cartilage in their knees, were coming out of the Army, and they had just invented arthroscopic surgery. It was in an infancy stages then. And they were looking to do arthroscopic surgery on these people and see how effective it would be rather than major surgery that they used to do before that. But they decided, why not do a sample of this and see what really works and what may be working because of someone's mind, the placebo. So they took 500 soldiers with the exact same problem in their knees, and they told each of them the same thing. They introduced them to an anesthesiologist. This is Dr. So-and-so. He's going, or she is going to put you under an anesthesia. You'll be asleep. You won't know anything that's happening. Then me, the surgeon, I am going to make a small hole in your knee right in this spot right here. I'm going to insert some instruments. I'm going to, through those instruments and looking through a microscope, I'm going to remove dead cartilage, loose cartilage, torn cartilage. Everything's going to be fine. I'm then going to sew up that little hole. You will come out of this in recovery. Your family will be there in recovery. You'll go through several weeks of physical therapy to work on all of the tension there and everything else in your knee, and then you'll be as good as gold. The interesting thing is they told that to all 500 people, but the 250 of the random ones that they selected, they went through discussion. The doctor said, I'm going to do this. The doctor, in fact, did drill a hole, but then sewed the hole up, did no surgery whatsoever on half of these people. 45% of them came out of there with no problems with their knee anymore. 45% of the ones who never had surgery, they just thought they were getting the surgery. That's the placebo. How in the world can our minds, our thoughts, impact our bodies physically? The proof goes on and on. Medical students, who are the most psychosomatic people ever because all they're learning about is these horrendous diseases that they could get, right? Medical students who are reading about something in a medical book the next week, you know, a large percentage of them are suffering from these symptoms all of a sudden, worried that they could get them. That has brought on the fear that's bringing on some of these symptoms. So it's just amazing what we know about placebos. And in fact, because of this, a large part of my practice has been using hypnosis with clients to use their mind in a very positive way to convince them that things will be well. You can fix things that aren't well. You can get healthier. And that's been a very successful part of my practice. I teach everyone self-hypnosis, make recordings for them so that their mind can make things better. So the first step, ladies and gentlemen, in realizing that, you know, our thoughts are really the culprit here. In fact, I wrote a book once called I wrote a book that's so far out of print, I can't remember the title, but it's recognizing the internal culprit, you know, how to change the internal culprit that's sitting there and bothering you all the time. So you need to recognize the automatic toxic thinking patterns you have first. Am I overgeneralizing? Like, do I take a little piece of information and blow it way out of proportion? Am I catastrophizing? Am I taking a little piece of information like we have the pandemic and you are going to have to work from home? Am I blowing it out of proportion to what if they never find a cure and I'm stuck here for 10 years? That would be catastrophizing, okay? Am I catastrophizing, oh, I got the sniffles today. That must be the forerunner of the pandemic. Oh my God, I'm going to be sick any moment. You can actually make yourself sick with a thought like that, as I just explained. So catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, using should statements like I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that. All of this is explained in detail in the book, how to recognize these thoughts. So I don't want to go through all of that now. It takes too much time, but it's all in the book. How do we challenge these thoughts? When we recognize we have these thoughts, how do we challenge them? Well, the first thing is When you're feeling any negative emotion, ladies and gentlemen, whether it's anxiety or depression or irritation or impatience, unhappiness, worry, fear, that's the first clue. I must have been thinking something that made me feel that way. What was I thinking? Once you recognize the thought, it could have been a what if thought. What if this doesn't get better? What if I can't do the work that Robert and other people, Alicia, expect of me, and I don't get it done in time? What if my teenager is really struggling with doing work on the internet and I don't have time to help that teenager or a younger child or what have you? Any what if statement will set this off. So the first thing to do is to, after you recognize what these thoughts are, we want to challenge the thoughts, because unchallenged, toxic thoughts trigger a chain of anxiety-provoking, depressive, frightening emotions like I've just talked about. So how do you challenge your thoughts with questions? I'm going to give you several questions now to use, but again, these are all in the book again, and you don't have to worry about writing these down. Where is the evidence to support my anxiety-producing thoughts right now? What is the probability that what I'm afraid of is actually going to happen? Could I be exaggerating the situation in my mind? Am I turning a minor setback into a major catastrophe? Are there any other alternative explanations that could explain what happened or what I'm worried about is going to happen next? Are my conclusions based on my emotions rather than on facts? Am I using extreme words and phrases in my thoughts, like this will always happen, or this is definitely going to happen to me, or my partner never understands my situation? These are extreme words that cause people to get angry and irritated and frustrated and so forth. Am I assuming the worst will happen without any real evidence of it? Am I jumping to conclusions that are not completely justified by the evidence? Have I had any experiences that show that this thought is not completely true all of the time? Maybe it happens sometimes, but maybe it's not always true. Here's a good one. If my best friend or someone I really love had the same thought, what advice would I give them? Think about that, because very often we don't give ourselves the same advice that we would give a loved one. We don't treat ourselves the same way we treat other people. We're much harder on ourselves. In fact, somebody wrote a book, a psychologist wrote a book a few years ago called Compassion. It's all about having compassion for yourself and giving yourself a break. Don't be so hard on yourself and expect yourself to be perfect, or other people around you to be perfect, for example. Give yourself a break. You do the best you can in a situation, that's fine. You don't have to be perfect to be successful. And in fact, when I teach world champions how to become world champions, whether it's an athlete or a CEO or a company, people in a company, it's never about how to be perfect. It's how to do the best you can at every moment. And once you've done that, what did you learn from it that you can use the next time? I used to tell athletes when I was working exclusively with athletes who would come to me with their head down, excuse me, because they lost a match or an event. I would say, why is your head down? You won. They said, no, Dr. Jack, I lost. I said, no, you didn't. You won. They said, what are you talking about? Did you watch? Did you hear about it? Did you read about it? I said, of course you won. I said, what do you mean I won? They said. I said, did you learn something from that? Oh yeah, I learned that next time. I said, hold on, if you learned something, you won. You won because now you can move to the next step. So every time a situation happens, whether you consider it a win or a loss or anything, what did I learn from it that I can take to my next opportunity? I'm excited, ladies and gentlemen, because next week I have an opportunity to give a program like this to all of the sports coaches at my alma mater at the University of Massachusetts. You don't think I'm thrilled about being able to do something for my alma mater for once? I graduated more than 50 years ago. Finally, someone's giving me an opportunity to do something. I'm going to talk to all the coaches about this, about how you talk to your athletes, the same way that I could talk to CEOs or you. It's all the same concept. That's why the book is really generic for anybody. So if my best friend or someone I love had this thought, what would I tell them? If my best friend or someone I love was thinking this thought, what would they say to me about it? or I'm sorry, if they knew I was thinking this thought, what would they say to me? If I asked my best friend or my partner or anyone about what I'm saying to myself, what would they say to me about this? Have I been in this type of situation before? If so, what happened? Are there any strengths or positives in me that in this situation that I'm ignoring? For example, all of you have adjusted to the demands of this pandemic in a very positive way. Even though you may be stressed, which after this you won't be anymore, but even though you may have been stressed, you've learned how to adapt to a situation you never predicted. Nobody ever expected this to happen. Maybe your children have learned to now adapt to something called, online learning. Maybe they don't have to always be in a classroom to learn now. Maybe you were considering homeschooling. Now it's not as scary as maybe you thought, because kids are showing you that they can do this now. Maybe if you have a child who's an athlete or in dramatics or in some other area of endeavor where they have to travel, and you were faced with having to pull them out of regular school, now you can see there's an alternative that may not be so bad. So we're learning a lot of things from this pandemic. Schools are learning they don't have to always have in-class classes to be successful. We're learning all kinds of things that we didn't know before, so you're already adapting. And the last thing I would ask you to ask yourself when you're questioning your toxic thoughts is, am I blaming myself for something over which I don't have complete control? That happens so many times. So next subject, and remember, if you have questions, we're going to go through these at the end. So you can, I don't know if you want to put the questions in the chat room or jot them down to ask later, but I'm going to get to whatever questions there are. I just have to leave at 2 o'clock. So that's my deadline. How to embrace the power of optimistic thinking. Now, why am I talking about optimistic thinking? Because there's been research over the past 45 years that shows that people who look at situations are unfortunate, that bad situations, difficult situations, situations where they perceive that they failed, anything like that, if they look at it and explain it to themselves in an optimistic way, which I'll explain in a minute, rather than in a pessimistic way, then they become very successful down the road in the next situation they're in. They become very successful. In fact, that's optimism is the #1 personality trait for 50 years now that has been discovered that separates highly achieving people in almost every profession, sales, athletics, you name it, any profession, from people who are okay at it, but not champions. So I have a whole section in the book on learned optimism. I have whole webinars. I teach people on how to develop optimistic thinking. So when we talk about an unfortunate event that takes place in your life, let's say there's something you feel you could have done better, it didn't work out, you didn't do well, you're beating yourself up about it. The optimistic way to look at this and explain it to yourself is that this was a temporary phenomenon. It's like an aberration. This isn't who I am, so I didn't do it right this time. I'll fix it the next time. You look at it as temporary rather than permanent. Pessimistic people look at these things as, oh, it's never going to get better. I feel hopeless. The second criterion for optimistic thinking is knowing that you will once again have control over your life. Pessimistic people say, I don't know how to fix this, so I have no control. There's nothing I could have done to fix this or make it better the next time. And the third criterion is optimistic people know that whatever happened here is not reflective of them in general, that this doesn't reflect bad on how I generally go about things. I'm very successful and I can use that same work ethic and motivation to be successful again. The pessimistic person who interprets the situation says, I feel helpless. I screw up in so many areas of my life. This is just another example. I don't think anything's ever going to make me okay. Now, the sad news is that many of you are getting a little alarmed now because most of you are pessimists. We know that from the research that most people look at things in a pessimistic way, not an optimistic way. But again, you can learn how to change that. You can make those changes. That's critically important. So we need to take an optimistic interpretation of what happens and move on to the next opportunity rather than a fearful, pessimistic, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I don't know what to do. This has always been a problem. I knew sooner or later I'd screw up, and here's a perfect example of it. That's the pessimistic interpretation. Another example of that is something I talk about to all of my audiences called the imposter fear. That many people, and many of your advisors fit into this, many people believe that they're not as good at what they do as key people in their life think they are, like their mentors, like Snappy Kraken people think they are, or like their partner thinks they are, or that their children think they are, or that their coaches think they are. I am really not this good, and it's only a matter of time before someone's going to notice that, and I'm going to be mortified out of my mind. So they operate defensively all the time, just waiting for the other shoe to fall. If we use a poker analogy, it's like everybody thinks you're a royal flush and you feel like you're a pair of sixes. And it's only a matter of time before people will figure this out. That's a really unfortunate, bizarre fear, but it's very common. So I work with a lot of people on how to overcome that. You know, COVID-19 has presented many unexpected and unwelcome life changes, and it's been hard to adapt, but you've done that. How can I thrive personally through this crisis and whatever's ahead? Well, unhealthy ways of doing that would be to say to yourself, this will never end. Working inside and with my family stuck with me will always be a problem for me. That's unhealthy thinking. Healthy thinking, is there a silver lining here? Am I really capable of adapting to forced changes? I've just proven it to myself. Could the silver lining be that I have more valuable time with my family and children than I ever had before? I'll give you a great example of a silver lining. I have a daughter who's a high-powered attorney. She is the most stressed, never reads my books. Her office manager is constantly saying, read your father's books, read my books. Okay. Says, I can't read my father's books. That's silly, right? Even though she's in the beginning of the book. I mentioned it. Maybe that's why she doesn't read the book. So anyway, she calls me up the other day and she says, Dad, you've been hounding me about how tense I am all the time and how intense I am and how I never calm down and that I'm getting myself sick and everything. I thought everyone is like me. Now that I'm forced to take time off and I'm at home, how busy it was, I'm realizing this is a way people can actually live. I didn't know it was possible. Her entire life from high school through college, through her career, has been this intense, have to be perfect. She's been putting all this pressure on herself. And now with the pandemic, she's realizing there's another way to live. So I even sent her to other psychologists. I said, don't listen to your father, go to another psychologist. The other psychologist said, listen to your father. I read his book. Okay, and it didn't make any difference. Okay. So are my children learning how to thrive with online learning? This is a skill they'll be able to use through college when they can't be asked, what if they're sick? Now there can be online learning to make up for the lessons they missed. What if they're in sports activities or drama or something where they have to travel? Now there's online learning that everyone can adopt to. So I figured for the last part of this, I would actually teach you how to inoculate yourself against stress. We're all talking about inoculating ourselves against COVID-19, but there are stress inoculation techniques. In fact, in my book, there's an entire chapter on this. I'm going to give you a couple of highlights on how do you inoculate yourself, almost like put a layer of Teflon between you and stress. What are some of the techniques? Technique number one that I'll share with you is thought stopping. You know, before I mentioned when you realize you're feeling some negative emotion, you need to find out what were the thoughts I was thinking right before that. And then when you realize the thoughts, am I generalizing? Am I catastrophizing? I can challenge those thoughts with all of these questions. But here's something I can do. I can actually stop the thoughts. How do I do that? I suggest you wear a rubber band. I call it, it's a number 64 rubber band. It's the kind that comes in the mail, okay? By the way, Ariel, you've been nodding your head 90% of the time, so obviously either you've heard all of this before or you can identify with all of it, but it's great.
It's a whole bunch of stuff that I practice, yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. My eyes keep going to Ariel because she's nodding. We did a study in a psychology class once where the whole class decided every time the professor looks to the left, everybody nods. When the professor looks to the right, don't nod. The professor spent 90% of the time looking to the left because we were nodding. That was a cute experiment we did with the professor. In any case, so Snap the rubber band as many times as you need to until either your wrist is inflamed or you feel enough pain so that your brain will say, okay, we're going to stop the thought. That's step one. Once you stop the thought, take some deep breaths in through your nose to the count of 4. Hold it for another 4 seconds, and then a big exhale out through your mouth like you're blowing through a straw to the count of 7. That will calm you down. And step 3 is you're going to change it to some kind of more rational thought, like, I was being irrational. I didn't have to worry about that. Here's a better way to look at that. And as you practice this over and over again, and the book actually gives you a template to do that, practicing it over and over again, you start to change these negative habits you've developed. A second technique, calming techniques. Just breathing itself is calming. You don't have to be afraid to nod now, Ariel. That's fun. Okay, breathing itself is calming. There are mindfulness techniques. There are free mindfulness apps that you can get for your phone or your smart tab or anything, iPad, that are wonderful, that tell you mindfulness things to do every day, which have a calming effect. Here's one that has been very successful in my entire career. So I get closer to the camera. Listen carefully. This has been very successful in my entire career. Pay attention. I want you to develop a worry time. What? A worry time? Absolutely. You're going to worry anyways. So instead of worrying all day, make a deal with yourself to block out 10 minutes a day, same time every day, when you can worry all you want undisturbed, but you only get to worry for those 10 minutes, okay? And if you can do that and free yourself for the rest of the day, you will be amazed at how you will feel. You have a 10-minute worry time at a time, not when you're going to sleep, by the way. That would be the worst time, because that's why people don't sleep. They worry before they fall asleep, and their brain wakes them up after they've fallen asleep. It's between 2 and 3 in the morning, usually, that you wake up if you were worried ahead of time. Give yourself compassion. Remember, what would my best friend say to me if he or she knew that I was feeling this way? What advice would they give me, or what advice would I give them if they had the same problem? Okay? Communicate with everyone in your home. The last program I did for Robert involved something called active empathic listening. That's in the book too. How to communicate with people without judging. If your child is frustrated, instead of saying, "Can't you see I'm working?" begin by saying, "I understand you're frustrated because you need me to help you with this, and I promise you I will as soon as we're done." That's a much better response than yelling and screaming out of frustration to your child or partner or whoever it is. Be a role model for your other family members. You be the role model showing them how you're adapting to unexpected changes, because they're going to face unexpected changes the rest of their lives. So you can be a wonderful role model. As I've said, we're all creatures of habit, but we can change those habits. And I have been very fond for the last 30 years of a wonderful poem that I want to close with, that embraces the fact that you can challenge these habits you've had. You don't have to continue them anymore. You can change them by just putting your mind to it. So this is called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. The author's name is Portia Nelson. I don't recall if this is in the book, so you may want to write down Portia Nelson, Portia Nelson, and you can find it online. Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find my way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there, but I still fall in. It's a habit, but my eyes are open. I know where I am now. It is my fault, and I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. And chapter 5, I choose to walk down a different street. So ladies and gentlemen, it's up to you. Are you going to be a creature of habit and continue to walk down the street? Or are you going to look at this as an opportunity to choose a different street which can change your life? Thank you very much, everybody, for your kind attendance and being awake through this presentation.